82 girls are still missing. Not from last year, not from 5 years ago, from 2014. Over a decade has passed and 82 of the Chibok girls have still not come home. Now here's the thing that nobody is talking about. While the world moved on, while the hashtag died, while the press conferences stopped, while the politicians found new talking points, the mothers of those girls never stopped. They're still in Chibok, still farming, still sending their children to school, and now they've turned their pain into a brand, a real growing food business, with factories, with products on shelves. And one Emmy-winning filmmaker just spent 3 years living with them to document what actually happened after the world looked away. So the question I want to answer today is this: how do you rebuild a life when the government failed you, the world forgot you, and the threat that destroyed your family is still out there, right now, today? Stay with me because the answer will stay with you. Before we go deeper, if you're just finding Niger Newsfeed, welcome. This channel exists to break down what's really happening in Nigerian politics and society without the noise, without the spin. Hit subscribe and stay with me because this one gets interesting. Let me take you back to the night of April 14th, 2014. It's late. The town of Chibok, Borno State, is quiet. The government girls' secondary school had actually been closed for 4 weeks because of deteriorating security in the northeast, but the girls came back, that night specifically, to sit their final exams in physics. 276 of them, aged 16 to 18, mostly Christian, some Muslim. Boko Haram came in the dark, loaded them onto trucks, and disappeared into the Sambisa forest. 57 girls managed to jump from the moving trucks and escape, but 219 were taken deep into the bush, and the world slowly woke up to what had happened. The hashtag Bring Back Our Girls exploded globally. Michelle Obama held a sign, celebrities tweeted, governments made statements, and then, gradually, the noise faded. Fast forward to today, March 2026, a new documentary, Mothers of Chibok, directed by Emmy Award-winning filmmaker Joel Kachi Benson and executive produced by Nollywood icon Joke Silva, has just opened in cinemas across Nigeria and Ghana, and it is reigniting this conversation in a way that no press release or hashtag ever could. Because this film doesn't show you grief, it shows you what survivor looks like 12 years later. That's why we're here today. But to understand what makes this story politically significant, not just emotionally, we need to look at the institutional failures that made Chibok possible in the first place. Here's something that doesn't get said enough. Chibok was not just a tragedy, it was a systemic failure at multiple levels of the Nigerian state, and understanding those levels tells you a lot about where we still are today. First, security intelligence. The Nigerian military had prior warning about possible attacks on Chibok. There were reports that the school had actually been closed for exactly that reason, security concerns. Yet, the girls were called back for exams and there was no significant military presence to protect them. Second, the state government. The Borno State government and the federal government were effectively in a blame-passing contest for the first critical weeks. Neither moved with the urgency the situation demanded. By the time the world was screaming, "Bring back our girls," Boko Haram had already vanished deep into terrain the Nigerian military struggled to navigate. Third, the constitutional structure. Security in Nigeria is a federal matter. State governors don't command the army. That gap between who sees the threat locally and who controls the force to respond is a gap that Boko Haram understood and exploited very deliberately. And here's the gray area that is still being exploited today. Between 2014 and 2024, more than 1,400 school children were abducted from Nigerian schools. Not one child, not one school, 1,400. Chibok was not an aberration, it became a template. So who actually benefits from the fact that this is still happening? That's where the political strategy gets uncomfortable.
This is the part of the conversation that people avoid, but we're not going to avoid it here. Let's talk about who benefits from the Chibok story staying unresolved. Because in Nigerian politics, an unresolved crisis is always useful to somebody. Point 1. Boko Haram's strategic calculation. A military commander based in Maiduguri said on record that Boko Haram viewed the Chibok girls as their trump card. The more international attention the girls received, the more valuable they became as a bargaining chip. Global visibility, ironically, made them harder to rescue, not easier. Point 2. The political capital in victimhood. When the Jonathan administration was embarrassed globally by #BringBackOurGirls, it became a weapon in the 2015 elections. The APC used the government failure on Chibok as evidence of incompetence. It worked. Now, fast forward. The Buhari administration negotiated partial releases, but the remaining 82 girls never came home. Each successive government has found it easier to make symbolic gestures than to do the hard, dangerous work of recovery. Point 3. The silence of the silent players. There are people in Abuja, in Borno, and in regional security networks who know significantly more about where the remaining girls are than they have ever publicly admitted. Ransom negotiations happen in the dark. The public sees nothing. And as long as the girls remain in the shadows, certain arrangements remain undisturbed. Point 4. The Northeast as a political bargaining zone. Borno State and the broader Northeast have been used as leverage in federal resource allocation conversations for years. The security crisis in that region has become so normalized that it barely registers in Abuja's budget priorities, unless there's an election coming. What the Mothers of Chibok did, quietly, without fanfare, was refuse to play this game. They didn't wait for government. They farmed. They organized. They built something. Here's a fact that completely reframes this story. One of the women in this documentary, Mariam Ali Mayanga, was herself one of the kidnapped girls. She escaped in 2016. She now has a 9-year-old son, born in captivity, from a forced marriage with a Boko Haram fighter. And she said something that should stop every Nigerian politician in their tracks. If he grows up without education, he might decide to follow his father's footsteps, especially considering the stigmatization from people. This woman, who survived abduction, forced marriage, and captivity, is now using peanut farming to keep her child out of the very terrorist organization that took her. Tell me that is not the most powerful political statement made in Nigeria in the last decade. Let's deliberate on this. What does the Chibok story, and specifically this new chapter of it, mean for Nigeria as a whole? On security, Boko Haram and its splinter group ISWAP are still active in the Northeast. The threat has not gone. As recently as November 2025, just 4 months ago, 303 students and 12 teachers were abducted from a school in Niger State. The pattern continues. The cycle is not broken. On education, Haram in Hausa-inflected Arabic means forbidden. Boko Haram's entire ideology is that Western education is forbidden. And yet, the Mothers of Chibok year after year put every naira they earn from their peanut harvest into school fees. Ladi, one of the 4 mothers profiled in the documentary, teaches other girls the value of education even while waiting for her own daughter to come home. That is a direct, daily, grassroots counter-insurgency, without a gun, without a government program. On gender and economics, the film captures something brutal and real. A scene where the Chibok women are walking the fields, fetching water, processing food, doing everything. The camera cuts to men sitting under a tree playing a traditional board game. This is not a coincidence or an accident of filmmaking. It is the reality of who holds up communities in northern Nigeria when the state has failed. And it raises the question, what would Nigeria's economy look like if these women had access to capital, to markets, to infrastructure, instead of just resilience? On the brand of Nigeria itself, when the rest of the world hears Chibok, they hear kidnapping, failure, Boko Haram. The filmmaker Kachi Benson said something powerful at the Lagos premiere. I dream that we take that name, the Mothers of Chibok, and make it into a brand associated with resilience and hope and courage, as opposed to abduction, kidnapping, and terror. They are now literally doing that, with jars of peanut butter on shelves. Now, if what I just laid out surprises you, drop a comment below. I want to know your take before we get to the part that changes the whole picture.
This story has a genuine international dimension, so we're keeping this section in. The documentary, Mothers of Chibok, did not premiere in Lagos. It premiered at Doc NYC, one of the most prestigious documentary festivals in the world. It then screened at the Santa Barbara International Film Festival, FIPADOC in France, the Encounters South African International Documentary Festival, where it won the Al Jazeera Award for Best African Feature-Length Documentary, and received a special mention at the IDA Documentary Awards. The director, Joel Kachi Benson, is the same man whose previous documentary, Madu, won an Emmy at the 2025 News and Documentary Emmy Awards for Outstanding Arts and Culture Documentary. This is not an amateur filmmaker. This is Nigeria's storytelling at its highest international level. Why does this matter politically? Because the international framing of Nigeria's Northeast has consequences. When the dominant image is kidnapping and failure, it shapes how foreign governments engage or don't engage with the region. It shapes aid flows. It shapes investment decisions. It shapes diplomatic postures. When a different story is told, one of women building businesses, farming through grief, sending children to school, it changes what's possible. Internationally, it changes how donors, NGOs, and development institutions see the region, and domestically, it creates pressure on Nigerian institutions to match the narrative their own people are living. There's also a diaspora dimension here. Nigerians abroad, in the UK, in the US, in Canada, need to understand that the Chibok story is not closed. 82 girls are still missing. And the women building the Mothers of Chibok brand need exactly the kind of investment and market access that diaspora Nigerians are uniquely positioned to provide. Let me give you the number that broke me when I read it. 9 women, 9 farmers in Chibok with access to improved seeds, fertilizer, and training. In 2024, they planted 465 kilograms of seed across 8.5 hectares and harvested 88 bags of groundnut. In 2025, with better technique, even with less seed, some of these women reported harvest increases of 500 to 600%. Hanatu went from 3 bags to 26 bags in a single season. These women didn't need government. They needed someone to believe in them and give them the tools. The pilot started with 9 women. The plan is 100 by end of 2026, 1,000 within 5 years. That is not charity. That is an economic movement. Let's address the argument you will hear, because some of them sound reasonable until you examine them closely. Misconception 1. The Chibok story is old news. We've moved on. No, 82 girls are still missing as of today. Mass kidnapping from schools is still happening. 303 students taken in November 2025 alone. The pattern didn't end. The headlines did. Those are different things. Misconception 2. The documentary is just emotional storytelling, not real analysis. This is the criticism some will level, especially those uncomfortable with what the film reveals about structural failure. But here's the thing. The film is not asking you to cry. It is asking you to think. It documents women building a functioning agricultural enterprise in a terrorism-active zone without government support, with minimal resources, and achieving measurable results. That is data. That is economic development in action. Misconception 3. The remaining girls must have integrated into Boko Haram by now. There's nothing to rescue. This argument has been made quietly in certain Nigerian circles. It is dangerous and it is wrong. Returned girls have testified to forced marriages, beatings, and coercion. Integration was not a choice, and the stigmatization that returned girls and their children face, including children like Mariam's son, is itself a crisis that needs direct policy attention. Misconception 4. This is a Christian-Muslim issue. It is not. Among the 276 girls taken were both Christian and Muslim students. Boko Haram did not discriminate by faith. It discriminated against education itself. And the mothers organizing today, farming, advocating, building, are also both Christian and Muslim. The ideology was about power and control. Don't let anyone reframe it as a religious conflict to avoid accountability.
What happens next? Here's what I'm watching. The Mothers of Chibok brand expansion. The plan is to scale from 9 to 100 women farmers by the end of 2026 and to 1,000 within 5 years. Supporting that process with investment, with market access, with corporate partnerships is one of the most direct ways any Nigerian or diaspora actor can contribute to something that actually moves the needle. Watch for whether Nigerian brands and corporates step up, or whether this remains a foreign-funded NGO story. The fate of the 82. 12 years in, the likelihood of rescue through conventional military means has diminished significantly. Any resolution is almost certainly going to come through negotiation, the same kind of quiet, dark channels that have produced partial releases in the past. Watch for any signals from Abuja, from Borno State, or from international mediators about renewed engagement. When you see certain officials making quiet trips to Maiduguri with no press, that's a signal. The documentary's political impact. Mothers of Chibok is currently showing in cinemas across Nigeria and Ghana until the end of March 2026. Its domestic visibility is a moment. If it generates enough conversation, enough public pressure, it could force politicians who would rather forget Chibok back into accountability. Watch whether any federal legislator responds publicly. Watch whether the Presidential Advisory Council on Security references it. Silence from Abuja will be its own message. The broader kidnapping economy. What happened in Niger State in November 2025, 303 students and 12 teachers taken, confirms that mass kidnapping has become a self-sustaining industry in the Nigeria's North and Middle Belt. The Chibok story is not historical. It is the template for what is still happening right now. The strategic question for Nigeria is whether there is the political will to break the economic model that makes this industry profitable. Best case, the documentary generates enough domestic and international momentum to reignite negotiations for the remaining 82. The Chibok Peanut Initiative scales, creates economic independence for hundreds of families, and becomes a model for community-led post-conflict reconstruction. Nigerian institutions finally implement the kind of school security architecture that should have existed in 2014. Worst case, the film has its moment, gets good reviews, wins more awards, and then the conversation fades again, exactly as it did in 2014. The 82 remain in the forest. Kidnappings continue. The mothers keep farming, not because anyone helped them, but because they have no other choice. Here is the open loop I want to close for you. At the beginning of this video, I asked, how do you rebuild a life when the government failed you, the world forgot you, and the threat that destroyed your family is still out there? Yana Galang, 55 years old, mother of 8, still waiting for her daughter Rifkatu, answered that question without knowing she was answering it. She said, if we just sit back and do nothing, if we stop sending our children to school and stop going to our farms, that would mean accepting what Boko Haram wants, which is that Western education should be forbidden. Read that again.
This woman, whose daughter was taken 12 years ago and has not come home, is running a farming operation, processing peanuts into branded products and sending every naira she earns into her children's school fees. Not because she is over her grief, because she refuses to let her grief become Boko Haram's victory. That is the most sophisticated counter-terrorism strategy I have heard from anyone in Nigeria in the last decade. And it came from a woman in Chibok who never got a government contract, never appeared on a panel, and never asked for a photo. So, what is the Chibok story really? It is not a kidnapping story. It stopped being a kidnapping story a long time ago. It is a story about what happens when a state fails its people completely, and the people, especially the women, build something anyway. It is a story about how narrative controls power. The world called these women victims. They became farmers, advocates, entrepreneurs, and now brands. It is also a story about accountability deferred. 82 girls are still missing. That is not a footnote. That is an indictment of the security architecture, of the political calculation, of every administration that found it more convenient to move on than to follow through. The mothers of Chibok didn't move on, and I think they are right not to. My position is clear. Nigeria needs to see this documentary not as an act of mourning, but as a masterclass in what communities can do when they stop waiting for Abuja to show up. And Abuja needs to understand that the mothers of Chibok are building the future of their community with or without you. And the question is whether you're going to be part of that story or just another institution they had to work around. What do you think? Drop it in the comments. I want to know whether you think the government can still do anything meaningful here, or whether the mothers of Chibok have already shown us the only way forward. If this breakdown gave you clarity on what's really going on, do me a favor, share it with one person who needs to understand this. Like the video, subscribe to Ninja Newsfeed, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay sharp.